As he neared Damascus on his journey, suddenly a light from heaven flashed around him. He fell to the ground and heard a voice saying, Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? Who are you, Lord? Saul asked. I am Jesus whom you're persecuting. He replied, now get up and go into the city and you'll be told what to do. The men traveling with Saul stood there speechless. They heard the sound, but didn't see anybody. Saul got up from the ground, but when he opened his eyes, he could see nothing. So they led him away by the hand into Damascus. For 3 days, he was blind and didn't eat or drink anything. I don't know how to describe that other than a vision. It's not like there was, at no point does it say there was a person there. Saul was blinded and heard a voice. I don't mean that I did. Oh, I bet I said apparition earlier. If I said apparition earlier, then I'll retract that. It was a sloppy word to describe a non-physical manifestation. Does it make sense?
Non-physical. So do you think that Paul thought Jesus was non-physical after his resurrection? So he describes himself as, or in Acts, Paul's described as seeing Jesus. Jesus says, I'm Jesus whom you are persecuting.
That's not him seeing Jesus, that's him hearing Jesus.
The event, if I said seeing, sorry, he's described as encountering Jesus. I'm Jesus.
We both did the same thing with seeing an apparition, so we'll call it a draw.
It had a actual effect and impact on those around him. A light shone from heaven around him. Other people saw that as well. It seems this is like some kind of a group experience. Falling to the ground, he heard a voice. So he fell to the ground. This thing caused him to fall to the ground. And it says it's Jesus. So the question is, did Paul think that, because we don't have a clear description of what Jesus, was he bodily or not bodily there? Did Paul think Jesus was bodily alive?
He couldn't have been bodily because the men heard the sound but did not see anyone. So the men heard a disembodied voice.
Well, no, that's definitely reading into the text. So let me go to our earliest source.
Verse 7.
What he saw.
Verse 7, the men traveling with Saul stood there speechless. They heard the sound, but did not see anyone.
Mike, what were you saying? You have a earlier...
So the earliest account from Paul is in 1 Corinthians 15. And Paul in this passage indicates what he thinks happened to Jesus when Jesus died. He says that he died for our sins according to the scriptures, that he was buried, that he was raised on the third day in accordance with the scriptures. And a lot of debate. And then he appeared to Cephas, to the 12, to 500 at once, to James, and finally to me, last of all.
Yeah.
Notice he thinks last of all, like these appearances of Jesus, they're temporary. Paul was the last one. But the thing is, N.T. Wright did a whole 500-page word study on what Paul was talking about here when he says Jesus was raised, when Jesus was resurrected. And there's no way around it. They believed that it was a bodily resurrection that had occurred. And anybody saying that the Jewish mentality, let me finish this, please. Anybody saying that the Jewish mentality would have been okay with thinking someone had been resurrected when they had merely appeared as in a ghostly form or invisible, just an invisible voice, is just not fitting with the history of the time. This is why we have confirmatory evidence.
You're spending a lot of time defending a position I neither express nor hold.
You said it was an apparition.
I used the word apparition, which I also retracted. In the description there, so you're defending that Saul thought that Jesus was bodily raised. And I never addressed that at all. That's my point. I have no problem with the fact that Saul thought Jesus was bodily raised. I was talking about the Damascus Road experience, which does not expressly say that he met a body. He heard a voice and was blinded. That is a single experience, which is completely independent of what he believed about the resurrection. So you're defending a position I never expressed and don't even hold.
I think you might. I hear you, Matt, but I think you might be misunderstanding what I'm trying to say.
You are trying to defend. You're defending against something that comes up from others who say that Paul never knew about or talked about Jesus.
Let me explain what I'm saying.
Because that's.
Let me tell you what I'm saying. You originally said apparition. You took that back. Thank you for that. It wasn't an apparition. Acts 9 is not clear on what Paul saw. It would be consistent with several different kinds of interpretations. It's not clear. So
it's
I don't
a voice that other people didn't see.
Let me finish, please. So I don't think that we can go to Acts 9 to establish what Paul thought he saw. So what we can do is we can go to other passages. It's mentioned twice in Acts, also in 1 Corinthians 15, where he makes it clear that he thought Jesus bodily rose and was physically resurrected in a glorified body. And we can go to Acts 13, where Paul describes Jesus, since you're going to bring Acts into the case. Paul says Jesus was killed by Pontius Pilate. He was buried in a tomb. He vacated the tomb bodily, and that he was seen by the disciples, and that we, including Paul, are witnesses of this bodily risen Jesus. Like that's Acts 13. So there's no way Paul thought this was an apparition or anything like that.
It's like we're speaking two completely different languages. I swear to the God that I don't believe in, that I just got done saying you are defending against position I never expressed and do not hold. I have no problem with the notion that Saul thought Jesus was bodily raised. I was reading what it says in Acts about that instant, not in any way presenting this case that you're defending against, which other atheists have presented, which is like Saul never knew of Jesus and never thought about Jesus in the terms of bodily thing. This all happened in some apparitions in space in a spiritual realm.
Carrier here. That's not what I'm defending against at all.
That is you were defending against a position that he and others have offered, which I have not presented, and all it's doing is distracting from actually getting to me addressing the points.
Let me offer just 2 words for the last sake of clarity here. I'm not saying, all I'm saying is if we're asking in Acts 9, what did Paul see according to the story, we should not conclude based on Acts 9 it was a bodiless Christ, because we have a lot of other support that what he thought he saw was a physically risen Christ.
So now we're back to what I retracted 7 or 8 minutes ago, and it was only a sloppy word that never meant to imply that in the first place.
Okay, well, I was...
What Saul
thought, which I've been listening for, and I asked you to back it up, and I'm glad you retracted it.
Okay, can I
it's just a go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to guide it back to something that you said earlier, Matt, and this was another thing that came up a bunch. You talked about candidate explanation. It has to be demonstrated that it can occur before it can be considered a candidate explanation.
Sure.
Mike, do you want to engage with that at all?
Wow. Okay.
Did you want to explain it one more time, Matt?
No, I was still trying to answer the question from before we got derailed because I accidentally said apparition. Because the thing is, what Saul believed about Jesus is what Saul believed. It's not what's true. It's not what is reasonable to believe. It's not what is evidenced. And so during Mike's opening, when he talks about James, the brother of Jesus, believed because he saw the risen Christ, James never tells us that. It's Paul who tells us that. Paul is writing all this stuff and relaying all this information on behalf of third parties. Hey, he appeared to the 12. He appeared to the 500. He appeared to James. Well, first of all, I have no evidence from any of those individuals who were cited that this attestation is accurate. And second of all, even if I did, we still have this problem of how do we establish that it's true just because somebody believed it? This is why it doesn't matter to me whether someone is convinced that Paul thought of Jesus as an actual physical resurrection or a spiritual one, because what Paul believes is completely irrelevant to what is actually reasonable to believe and what is supported by evidence. When you were going through this opening, you're talking about, oh, the empty tomb is multiply attested to in the Gospels, in pre-Mark accounts, and it's even enemy attested to in Matthew 28. No, it's not enemy attested to in Matthew 28. Matthew 28 reports something that, if it were true, would account as you have to assume that it's accurately reporting this.
Okay, let me
where is the actual enemy attestation? Because historians, when they view something, if there's 2 accounts and an actual enemy written account affirms something, that is an enemy attestation. The winning side writing that an enemy affirmed it is not an enemy attestation. That is just flatly false.
Okay, well, all I want to point out for the sake of the audience is that this is Matt's private opinion here. The way that Matt is recharacterizing the history of it is not the way historians look at it. Matt, why do you think that historians who don't believe the Bible, who don't think that Jesus rose, who are not Christians, and even many who are atheists, think that this counts as enemy attestation? Do you think
I'm not convinced that they do? That's just you telling me that they do. I have not seen
pretend right. Do you think that they're just being dummies?
Yes. If in fact they are saying, here's the thing, this is really simple. This shouldn't even be controversial. This is basic reasoning and skepticism. If I write a story and in that story I have a fact and I say, and then Mike came at me and made this accusation, which attests to this fact, that is not evidence that Mike actually did that. It is not a Mike attestation. It is me claiming what Mike said. If historians are looking at this and saying, well, that's an enemy attestation, they are simply wrong.
Okay.
Now, why and how are they doing it? Maybe because they grew up in a culture that just accepted these things as true. And so when they read the Bible, rather than saying, oh, hey, this was written by an anonymous source, and when he quotes somebody who seems supportive and yet is an enemy, that must be the case, because otherwise we'd have to say that this is a fictionalized account.
In a previous video, Matt, you were, if I remember correctly, I think I do, you suggested that the account of the guards at the tomb was invented by Christians because of the rumor that Jesus had stolen the body. This was something you'd suggested in a video. Do you still think that?
First of all, at no point would I've ever said anything as silly as Jesus had stolen the body.
Jesus, sorry, that was just a misspoke. So, because supposedly the disciples had stolen Jesus's body, is that something that you still think?
That the account of what the guards
at the tomb is a result of a response to the claim that the body had been stolen.
I think that that is one of many plausible reasons why that might be included.
If that is true, would that not imply that this is enemy attestation that the body was stolen?
No. And here's another example from this same thing, because I don't know if I said that, but on many occasions I've said lots of things, because when we talk about a number of explanations for why something might be included, early on there was the notion of this swoon theory. Basically, enemies of Christianity would say, well, how do you know he was really dead? And of course they would point to the record, and they would highlight the fact that a soldier stuck a spear into his side and he bled until there was water. Now the question is, did that actually happen? Was it in the original narrative, or was this something that was added as an exaggeration to be convincing? Because when somebody says, how do you know he was dead? You've got to come up with some explanation, and saying, oh, he was stabbed and he bled until he bled water, that would seem to be convincing to people if they accept it. But that doesn't tell you whether or not it actually happened, or whether it was an after the fact addition. And in a book where we know there are after the fact additions, I have to at least consider that a possibility. I'm not saying that it didn't happen. It may be the case that he died and that he bled until I'm not even an advocate of the swoon theory. I'm going
to take a stab at this
construction of the story.
No pun intended. I'm going to take a stab at this one real quick, but I'm going to predict that when I offer historical evidence that lends corroboration to the story of the piercing of Jesus by a spear, that you'll say that that's proof that it didn't happen. And maybe I'm wrong.
Wait, so you're going to offer evidence that this actually happened, and I'm going to say it's proof that it didn't, right?
Yeah. We'll see if I'm right. Quintilian is a Roman rhetorician, and he mentions that that the Romans would allow the burial of a crucified victim, providing they had first been pierced. This implying that a confirmatory stab of the victim to make sure they were dead before they were buried was part of standard protocol. So this seems to say, hey, this wasn't just added to exaggerate. This looks like a historically valid detail. So what do you think of that, Matt?
Sure. Assuming that that's accurate, then I would say that seems to be, I don't even challenge the fact that he stabbed with a spear, but bleeding until he bleeds water may have been a detail that was put on to know that he was dead. Stabbing with a spear could still leave you alive. I'm not, this is what I was trying to say just a second ago, and I was literally like 4 words from being done. I'm not advocating the swoon theory. I cannot rule it out. Even if I knew for a fact that he was stabbed with a spear, that doesn't necessarily rule it out. My question was, how did it enter the story? It's not the spear part that was objectionable or questionable as much as bleeding until there was nothing but water, because that is the thing that would attest to death.
Are you familiar with the medical research that's gone into this content specifically about the death of Christ, the blood and water being poured out?
I don't know. Am I familiar with the medical research on the blood of Christ? There is none.
I think you're purposely marginalizing what I just said.
I'm trying to understand it.
Okay, so when Jesus was pierced, blood and water poured out.
Sure.
And this seems to have one of two causes. Either the pericardium around the heart was pierced, in which case blood and water would pour out, or Jesus had died through the typical way someone dies on the cross, asphyxiation, and then the water in the lungs was gathering as a result after his death. So the piercing would have confirmed it. And sure. I mean, the purpose of the piercing would be to confirm it. It would be to get blood and water to pour out to make sure the guy was dead.
Yeah, and this is a prime example of what I objected to in the opening. The way that you go about phrasing things is, and I apologize, but considering I've already been called on the carpet for zombies, sloppy. Because when you ask me about, are you familiar with the medical research involved with the piercing of Christ? The answer is there is none. If instead it would be, do you understand what the reason for that might have been, or what the explanations for why there might have been blood and water? Yes, of course I've heard about those things, and it would not have been that remarkable. It reminds me of when people say, well, the Bible or the Quran attest to this scientific fact that people at that time couldn't have known. And yet it's absolutely understandable that people at the time could have known that. It's modern people who don't seem to understand things like, hey, what farmers are familiar with. So
this is what I had expected.
It's just about phrasing it in a way, because if you'd just said piercing confirms death, and there are medical explanations for the blood and water, maybe it's a mixture, maybe the pericardium has been ruptured, etc., I would have just said, yes, those are all just medical facts. But when you phrase it as archaeological evidence for this, medical evidence for the wound in Jesus's side, there's a phrasing there that smuggles in something. And I'm not even saying it's intentional. I don't think you have any ill will. I think you're, from all my interactions with you, you're a patient and great guy who is honestly trying to relay what you mean. But I am intentionally precise and pedantic when I can be, because I understand that the sloppy phrasing is what allows us to smuggle in things. It's what allows us to say, oh, well, there's all this evidence, when what we're really talking about is mundane things that just are, hey, this occurred in this time period. Crucifixion was real. Stabbing was real. Yeah, I know all that.
So we're going to go to questions and answers, not right now, but in just a few minutes. So just...
There's something I really want to get after, which has nothing to do with evidence. And I think it's actually at the core of Matt's objections. Matt, I've watched every video I could find of yours on your atheist debates project. Me too.
I'm legitimately sorry.
On your atheist debates project, your interactions on Atheist Experience, and your debates with guys like Junta and like Hona and all that. So I've really tried to understand your perspective. And to me, the evidence is secondary to you. And if I was Matt Dillahunty, I think if I could categorize it, I would say, I can come up with complaints about your evidence all day long, but in the end, there's a bigger obstacle for you, Mike, and that is, this is just plain irrational to believe, no matter what the evidence. So let me put something on the table for you and get your input on it, okay? Let's suppose that Jesus did what you suggested, and he came right now today, and he was killed in an electric chair, and scientifically confirmed that he was dead, and then he came back to life. Would you then believe God exists and that God had raised Jesus from the dead?
Oh, a very cleverly crafted question. No. Would I believe that Jesus was now alive again? Yes. And that was the thing that I was going to conclude my opening with, was even if we establish the resurrection, we still don't know why or how it happened. That is an explanation that has to come secondary. You're right. This does get to the core here, because if Jesus had done the things that I said would be the best way to demonstrate it, I'm not even sure that would necessarily be sufficient to convince me of a resurrection. It may be. When I say that I'm not sure what would convince me, I'm being honest, and I'm not saying nothing would convince me. Would it convince me of a resurrection? Maybe, possibly, probably, even very likely, had I had access to that actual evidence, and rather than just reportings of that evidence. But my reason for raising that wasn't to show that this would also be unbelievable, or this would be what would be believable. It's to show that God picked a time to do this where none of that is available. And that is stupid. Okay, so would you say this? If I was you, I would, let me see. I'm going to be Matt Dillahunty for a second. Tell me if I'm saying it right. You failed last time, but we'll get there.
I think you demonstrated that no evidence effectively doesn't matter, but we'll put it this way.
Oh my God. No. No.
Can you conceive?
Oh my God.
No, I can't. Evidence. Can you conceive of any? Let me just get this out.
Yeah, let Mike.
No, I cannot let you get this out.
You talked for like 2 minutes. I said one sentence and you're interrupting me.
That's because your sentence was to accuse me of evidence doesn't matter.
That's how a debate works, Matt. You got to let me talk.
Not.
This isn't your show, man. You got to let me talk.
I don't have to stay, is what I'm saying. Would you stop characterizing me as if evidence doesn't matter, when what I've said to you is that evidence is all that matters, and the evidence for your claim does not rise to the level of reasonableness in my estimation?
Is there any conceivable evidence in your mind that would give you the resurrection of Christ and God did it? Is there any conceivable evidence?
I have no idea, as I've said umpteen times, and as you paraphrased me at the beginning, what that evidence would be, which is completely irrelevant, because I'm not saying that I can't be convinced. I'm saying I don't know what would convince me. But what I'm also saying is what has convinced other people is not a good standard of evidence, because it does not exclude competing claims. that resurrection video I saw the other day. Do you think it was a resurrection?
No, I saw that video. The guy's breathing, literally breathing and moving inside the coffin. It was clearly false.
The video started after the resurrection process had started. So the video started when he recovered his breath. How do you discount that?
It's a nice ad hoc statement, but it's clearly ad hoc. Yeah.
I agree. And yet you accept something with less supporting evidence.
Definitely.
That is my point. And yet you accuse me of the evidence not mattering when the evidence is the only thing that matters. It doesn't matter how many people believed it, how sincerely they believed it, what religious context something was put into, or the fact that we couldn't come up with a better explanation. What matters is the evidence. And the fact that I cannot tell you what evidence would establish a resurrection is not a problem for my epistemology. It is a problem for the resurrection claim. There are countless things that I believe, and I believe them based on evidence. And for somebody to accuse me of not caring about evidence, when it's clear that I do believe things and I believe them based on evidence, and I'm willing to accept things, including your attestation for the spear being a common part or a standard part of crucifixion process, I'm willing to take you at your word for that, because the claim is not extraordinary. It is extraordinary claims that require extraordinary evidence, and the notion that this person was raised from the dead is absolutely extraordinary. And there is no physical evidence for it. There is no contemporary evidence for it. There's no evidence that this is even possible. And yet you just want to dismiss it as if Matt won't accept evidence. No, Matt won't accept insufficient evidence, and neither should other people.
Okay, well, I have a couple things I'd like to share about that. You mentioned a quote I've heard many times. I've heard especially in the skeptics community, which is the idea that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And I think, and I want to hear your opinion on this, but I think that this is circular. Let me explain why I think it's circular, and you can tell me where you think I'm wrong here. If I have an extraordinary claim, like Jesus is risen from the dead, and you require that I have extraordinary evidence to prove it, whatever evidence I offer that's extraordinary will in itself be a claim that's extraordinary, to which you can respond, I won't believe that until you have more extraordinary evidence. Well, if I do bring that, well, that's also extraordinary, which you don't believe unless you have extraordinary evidence. And this just circularly goes on forever, ruling out ordinary evidence for hypothetical extraordinary evidence that can never pass, never even enter the conversation.
No, the statement is extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. When you say, if I present extraordinary evidence, that's now extraordinary claim that requires extraordinary evidence. No, that is not an extraordinary claim. It is evidence that would satisfy the extraordinary. A better way of phrasing it might be that in order for the belief to be warranted, evidence must be sufficient or rise to the level of the extraordinariness of the claim. If I say, hey, I just bought a winning lottery ticket, that's an extraordinary claim. When I have the money, that is the extraordinary evidence that the claim was true.
I think an even better piece of evidence would just be, I watch the lottery numbers or I look them up online, and then you show me your ticket and it has the right numbers on it. And that's really ordinary evidence.
Except it's not, because I can print a winning lottery ticket. I'm a magician. Magicians do this trick on stage all the time. The extraordinary evidence is actually getting paid by the lottery commission, not just, look, I have something that matches those numbers. This is the failure of skepticism that you are engaging in this process.
Okay, I would add, that's great to see you actually get paid the money. That's also really good. But this is kind of ordinary events. One person giving another person money, unless the quantity of money is considered extraordinary. In which case, I would say the number of appearances of Jesus are extraordinary.
Reports of appearances of Jesus are not appearances of Jesus. When I say I have a winning lottery ticket, that's an extraordinary claim, because while it happens fairly regularly, it's still extraordinary. It's more extraordinary than saying I have a losing lottery ticket. And if I just show you the ticket, that's not extraordinary evidence. Extraordinary evidence is when I confirm that this is in fact a winning lottery ticket and I get paid, because that is an event that is more extraordinary than having a losing lottery ticket. All that claim is saying is that the quantity and quality of evidence for a claim is dependent on how extraordinary that claim is. If you say, I just got a pet puppy, I need nothing more than your word, because as I pointed out, I already know there are puppies. I know people have puppies as pets. There's nothing extraordinary about this. You could be lying, But the only risk to me in believing you and taking you at your word is that I ultimately find out you're a liar. Now, I may have reasons to not want to find out that you're a liar. Like I don't want to find out my mom's lying about the demon thing. I'd prefer to think that she's just, either not able to present her evidence or that she was confused or whatever. But if somebody says Jesus rose from the dead, that's an extraordinary claim that has fundamental impact on everything else in my life. And that's why I say that the evidence for that needs to be not only sufficient to that claim, but needs to overcome all the evidence for all the beliefs that contradict that.
So we're at the 9:30 mark. Are you guys okay if we switch to questions?
Sure.
Sure thing.
I'm good. If Mike had another one, I'm fine too, but you're running the show. So.
My only other question that I'll get out real quick if I can is I just wanted to know, have you tried to examine like what historically happened in the first century to come up with like a real, like sort of thoughtful, not vague, but like a thoughtful explanation for the evidence that's available?
So I don't know how what was going on in the first century would necessarily be relevant because
I'm referring to Jesus and his resurrection specifically. Wow. Just I don't want you to spend a bunch of time on it. A misunderstanding there. Sorry, go ahead.
So the short answer to your question is no. And the reason for the no is that what I have are a bunch of claims. And what was going on in the first century around this time is, while it's supporting evidence that could be showed that something claims are consistent, like here's the way people were buried, here's what was going on religiously, here was the conflict between, Judea and Rome. And I'm familiar with some of them, but I haven't spent time trying to come up with a better explanation for this because the current explanations don't have sufficient evidence to warrant them. And I see no way how investigating this in that context is ever going to provide any, because you can build a much more cohesive story, but that still doesn't tell you that it's true. You can't get to anything that would be extraordinary evidence unless I were like to go do archaeological digs myself and find the Roman records of Jesus's crucifixion and firsthand written accounts from the supposed 500. But I'm not an archaeologist. And by the way, nobody should have to be expected to do that research. If the model is true, not only did God make a mistake in picking the time, but it falls into this notion of divine hiddenness, because if God has a message that's important for the world, it's God's responsibility to make sure that the evidence is available to make it reasonable for people to accept it. And if God's punishing people for using their brain and saying, I'm not convinced, and then sending them to hell forever, then he's a moral monster.
I'd like to respond to that. That has nothing to do with my question, but I would like to respond to it. It's just an unfortunate mischaracterization of the facts. But I came to Christ, I was 12 years old, through the work of the Holy Spirit in my life. I mean, you don't have to believe this, but let me just put it at least out there as I'm convinced that this is true. And I didn't have any of this data. I looked at it secondarily as like, what if I'm delusional? I want to find out. Like, I expected no evidence from the first century to confirm this stuff because it's 2,000 years ago. There's hardly any evidence to prove events from, the distant past. When I found this mountain of support, it blew me away. And I think it's a wonderful thing. I don't want to shake my fist at it because it's not something it's not, but I have both personally. I have the personal testimony. Yep, God made himself real to me, but also the support from history. And I think that those are worth talking about.
You know what you just described? You believed first and then examined the evidence and found it consistent. That is the exact backward way of sound epistemology, sound investigation, critical thinking, and skepticism. You should follow the evidence where it leads, not make sure that it's consistent with what you already accept.
Well, that's what you're doing when you say you won't accept a supernatural explanation.
No, it's not
consistent with what you already accept.
Do you not know the bio where I was saved at the age of 5 and was active in the church and believed all this? And then when I began to understand epistemology, that I could not evaluate the evidence beginning with belief and then making sure that it fit. Because once you believe there's a God who can do anything, everything fits. Instead, you have to follow the evidence where it leads. And if it turns out the evidence is insufficient to establish the thing you believe, then you have to examine why you believed it in the first place. And it turns out I have no good reason to believe that there's a God or that Jesus was divine.